Hello and a huge welcome to the brand new and very exciting 4-episode mini-series podcast, So You Want to Be Inclusive. I am your hostess with the mostess, Jo McMeekan. I am the founder and director of Sense Story and my pronouns are she, her. Over the next 4 episodes, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the most frequently asked questions that I get from business owners, some of the conversations that I have, and some of my thoughts around how we can solve some of the biggest challenges and barriers that we have for inclusion and accessibility. I'm going to be giving you tangible wins and lots of impactful things to go away and try and do that are quick and easy to implement to help you on your way with your inclusion journey. But first, let's kick off with our very first pilot episode, Inclusion, How to Solve a Silent Problem. So one of the things that comes up in conversation with a lot of business owners, a lot of humans that I have a conversation with about inclusion, is that they want to do the right thing and they want to work with people for being good people. And it doesn't matter to them whether they are from a minority and a marginalised community or not. All that matters to them is that they are good people. This is something that I hear so often. And I have a slight bugbear with it on the basis that I think that sometimes it breeds complacency. So bear with me here, because I also talk a lot about the importance of embedding culture within inclusion. There are 7 areas that I teach in the Sense Story framework for inclusion. When it comes to creating an inclusive business, there are 7 different areas that you absolutely have to nail to get onto a really good path of being an inclusive and accessible business. And they are 7 things that you have to embed into your business and think about a lot of the time. And I'm going to be talking about this in episode 4. But for now, let's focus on culture, which is the first and most fundamental part of that pillar. It sort of sits at the base. It creates this foundation for what we do, and it makes what we do really sustainable around inclusion. It means that it is driven from a place of values for us as human beings. It comes from a place of belief. It's what we breathe into our business, and then that makes it sustainable as well. We move away from this process of box ticking when it comes to inclusion, when we create inclusive cultures and when we really believe that we want to make a difference and we want to work actively to include people from marginalised and minority communities. So culture is so fundamentally important. And when you are a heart-led business owner who wants to go and work with good people, no matter who they are, then you will already be on a really strong footing, because you will have embedded an element of inclusive culture into what you're doing in your business. But what often happens, one of the common pitfalls of being a heart-led, culture-led, inclusive business owner, is that we begin to get complacent and think that people know that we are inclusive, that we are a safe space. But having an inclusive culture in isolation doesn't make us a safe space for people to come and work with us. So let me give you an example of this. I've had conversations with business owners who will say to me, yeah, I'll work with anybody. I want to make sure that anybody comes through the door, feels welcome. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me who they are. So long as they're nice people, I'm ready to work with them. And then this business owner, for example, maybe goes to run an event. They pick a beautiful venue with lovely views, good food, and the right space, light and airy space. They open up the opportunity for them to, for people to come and work with them within this event, and they know that they'll welcome anybody in. But all of a sudden, somebody asks a question around physical accessibility, for example. Is the venue physically accessible? They go back to the venue, they ask, oh, is it physically accessible? And the venue will tell you that they meet DDA requirements. So they meet kind of a legal, very low threshold for accessibility. Again, I'm going to talk about accessibility in one of our later modules. This is just an example. And all of a sudden, we get to this place where we have somebody who is a wheelchair user or perhaps is neurodivergent and may need some sensory breaks and some rest. And there's no opportunity for access, and accessibility needs to be met within that event because only a very low threshold of accessibility need has been met by the venue. So they might have a ramp to go in and they might have a disabled toilet, but it doesn't mean you can get a wheelchair into that disabled toilet, and it doesn't mean that you can get, for example, a carer into that space as well. The doors to the event space and the room may well be too narrow for a powered wheelchair, and there may be a real big echo chamber out in the reception area, which is being used as the only possible option for a breakout space. So here you can see an example, using physical accessibility as an example. You can see how being a heart-led business owner just isn't enough. It isn't enough to know that you want to work with good people. We have to do the work as well. So here's what will happen when something like this happens and somebody isn't told actively that they are being welcomed into an inclusive and accessible space, and the ways in which that inclusion and accessibility is going to be met as a need. The complacency part of that means that we think that those people know that they're going to be welcome. The reality is that people will not feed back, or may be unlikely to feed back to you, that they can't access your work, or that they don't feel that working with you is inclusive. And I can talk about that on a personal level. So for those of you who don't know my backstory, I have spent 15 years working in the disability sector as a paediatric neurophysio. So I'm a total brain geek when it comes to anything clinical. I've worked with children and young people with a range of needs, from limb difference all the way through to cerebral palsy and brain injury. And part of that work, I have seen the same narrative being painted again and again with the families I've worked with. But secondary to that, I am also a queer and neurodivergent business owner and a SEND parent. I have children who have significant additional needs, who are autistic and autistic ADHD, and they have had massive barriers for inclusion, particularly with accessing support within the health and education systems. Now, all of these barriers to inclusion mean that there are significant challenges around mental health, around access to everyday activities for us as a family. So I experience these things firsthand as well as professionally. When I want to take the kids on a day out, because of the level of need that sits within our household and family, there are certain things that I look for in a venue to know whether or not I'm going to be able to have a successful day out with my kids. I set myself up for the best possible success. Not every day is successful when you're a parent, right? And if I can't find that information, I won't go. I won't invest, I won't buy a ticket to the thing, I won't do the thing. But what I also won't do is feedback. It's rare when I haven't gone to invest in something for me to feedback that something's not inclusive or accessible. It's more common if I've been and I've had a negative experience for me to feed that back. And so what we do is we create this silent problem around inclusion, because by me not feeding back when I can't find information on a website of a place that I want to go with the kids, when I can't find that accessibility information, me not feeding back that I'm not going and investing in that business is not going to create change. And so that business is no more aware than they were beforehand that that problem exists, that they're losing out on reaching people that they would be happy to reach, that they would be happy to meet their legal obligations and requirements for around reasonable adjustment if I'd asked. But I'm not going to ask. And I'm not going to ask for a number of reasons. And this is true for a lot of people across an array of marginalised communities. This isn't just the case for those who are neurodivergent and disabled, for example, or for those who are from within the LGBT community and perhaps trans and have a requirement for gender inclusive spaces and gender safe spaces. So it's across the board that these conversations are being had. It's not just within these sections. And it's really important to remember the sense of intersectionality that exists within inclusion. When we talk about this as a silent problem, we're not just talking about this as a silent problem in one area or two areas within inclusion and accessibility. It sits as a problem across the board. People are not going to feed back if they don't know that working with you is inclusive or space or a safe space. And that's why we lead to complacency. And that's why being a heart-led business owner is not good enough when it comes to inclusion. So what can you do about it? What can we do to be able to solve this silent problem around inclusion? Well, awareness is one thing. Knowledge and awareness is another one of the pillars that I'm going to talk about later in the episodes for the foundations that you need to build in the framework for inclusion. So awareness is one of them. And you're here, you're having this conversation with me now, you're listening to this, and you're hopefully beginning to have these light bulb moments and take on board about some of the things that you don't share, some of the things that maybe you have come to think about as being your norm, as being accepted, that people will know that you're a good human and want to come and work with you. And I know that because I can sense people a lot of the time, but it doesn't mean that you're doing everything that you can be. And it doesn't mean that people are going to tell you when you're not doing the thing that you need to be doing. And the reason is that all too often we will worry about feeling like people will think that we're making a fuss. We will worry that people will not understand or accept some of the adjustments that are necessary. The blank looks, the blank expressions that I have had to encounter when I've asked basic questions around genderless toilets, accessible toilet spaces, for example, when I'm out with my family, or some of the blank expressions and looks that I will get if we have had a moment of overwhelm and the kids need to step into an isolated, quiet sensory breakout space. When you are looked at like that request is an odd one, is an unusual one, is something that isn't the norm, it makes you feel awkward. And so inclusion becomes more of a silent problem. We don't speak up, we don't ask, because if you don't feel safe to ask for that support, if you don't know that the space that you're in is inclusive and accessible, we will stay silent. We'll stay silent and we won't share and we won't feedback because of the fear of not being heard, or worse, the fear of being heard and it's still not being met, or it's still being judged, or it's still being questioned and not understood, because that invalidates your experience as a human being with inclusion and accessibility needs. So we breed a silent problem when we come from a place of complacency, when we come from a place of accepting and thinking that we are heart-led business owners doing good things in the world and great work and having an inclusive culture, but not doing the 6 other things that you need to do to be able to support that to happen. I'm going to talk about some of the fundamental things within those 7 areas. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I will tell you what they are, but I'm not going to talk about all of them within the mini-series. I am going to share with you how to become an active ally and how to raise your voice, how to talk actively about being an inclusive space. I am going to talk to you about what those 7 areas are so that you can begin to look at them within your business as well and begin to identify some of the places that you might need to start first. I am also going to be talking to you about how to build accessibility into your business. And we're going to be looking at that on a digital platform as well as in person and events. So I'm going to give you a ton of tools to go away with. Now you know that this silent problem exists in your business. I'm going to give you the tools to go away and to fix it. But for today, let's give you one thing to take away. Hopefully lots of light bulb moments, but one thing to go and take away and do. And if you want to catch up with me, to share with me what it is that you are doing for this next action step, then please hop onto my Facebook page, my profile. I'm going to be putting lots of information out on there, and you can share in there in the thread about what your statement is going to be. So I'm going to challenge you today to have a think about what your vision and your values are. What is your heart-led belief around inclusion? Now, this doesn't have to be polished at this stage. We can just have conversations around it, okay? But when I work with businesses, when I run my Inclusive in a Day sessions, for example, we work really hard on creating inclusion statements. Now, we're going to work more on that later in the week, but for now, I just want you to think about what your personal values and beliefs are around inclusion. Share them with me, write them down, get the ball rolling, because once you become really clear on what that value is, what that culture is, and putting it into words, it makes it much easier for us then to begin to go and work on those next 6 steps for creating your inclusive business. So your big challenge for today is to think about what your values and your beliefs are around inclusion. What is your inclusion why? So I will see you on my Facebook profile. Let's have more of these conversations. If you want to hop in my DMs, if you're not comfortable with sharing things publicly, then my DMs are going to be open this week for having these conversations. And I am here to hold space to help you to move things forward so that you can be a more inclusive and accessible business. Thank you so much for joining me.